Escape Pod. Episode 688. A Most Elegant Solution. By M. Darusha Wem.
Hello, and welcome to Escape Pod, your weekly science fiction podcast. I'm Divya, your host for this episode. This week, we'd like to highlight a story in honor of International Non-Binary Peoples Day, which is on July 14th. The author is one of our very own associate editors, who also identifies as agender. Our story this week is A Most Elegant Solution by M. Darusha Wem. It was first published by Terraform in April 2018. M. Darusha Wem is the Nebula Award-nominated author of the interactive fiction game The Martian Job, as well as the science fiction novels Beautiful Red, Children of Arcadia, and the Anderson-Dexter cyberpunk detective series. Darusha's most recent book is The Voyage of the White Cloud, a novel and stories about the lives of the ordinary people on a generation starship. Writing as Darusha Wem, Darusha's mainstream books include the Davy Jones Locker YA series and the humorous coming-of-age novel The Home for Wayward Parrots. Darusha's short fiction and poetry have appeared in magazines and anthologies, including Terraform and Nature. Originally from Canada, Darusha currently lives in Wellington, New Zealand, after spending several years sailing the Pacific. Your narrator this week is Abra Staffen-Wiebe. Abra loves optimistic science fiction, cheerful horror, and dark fantasy. Dozens of her short stories have appeared at publications including Tor.com, Fantasy and Science Fiction, Escape Pod, and Odyssey magazine. She lives in Minneapolis, where she wrangles her children, pets, and the mad scientist she keeps in the attic. When not writing or wrangling, she collects folk tales and photographs whatever stands still long enough to allow it. Her most recent book, The Unkindness of Ravens, is an epic fantasy coming-of-age novella about trickster gods and favors owed. Now, get ready to be swarmed by little robots, because it's story time.
A Most Elegant Solution by M. Darusha Wem, narrated by Abra Staffen-Wiebe. I always said I wanted to be one of the first to die on Mars. I never wanted to be the last, but here I am. I can't even tell the others apart now. I know that inside those vaguely undulating metal cocoons are the bodies of the rest of my team. Marshall, Cherie, Jem, and Abdul. Which squirming ovoid contains whom, there's no way to tell. And I'm about to join them. The swarm has already engulfed my legs. I can't feel anything below the knee, which is a kind of relief. Devoured by my own creations is a terrible enough way to die. At least it probably won't hurt. I know I should be mourning the others, or desperately trying to save myself. Maybe this is a side effect of the paralysis. Maybe it's not just a physical, but an emotional anesthesia. Because all I can think about is how I got here. How we all got to be here, lying on the floor of our brand new habitation buildings, smothered by tiny robots. Abdul joked about Grey Goo, right from the beginning. We'd been living and working together in the lab on Earth for a year before we left, one of several teams preparing for the trip. None of us knew which team would be chosen to be the first, so we were all prepared. Working with the bots was a core competency for everyone, since they were the linchpin of the plan to make Mars habitable. But everyone knew that they were really mine. Betsy's bots, they called them. Except, of course, when Abdul was imagining them taking over the universe. "That's not funny," Jem said. We were all scientists, so none of us were superstitious exactly, but Jem never liked to hear talk of things going wrong. They always turned the conversation back to how to prevent disaster, instead of how to react to it. Jem was a glass-half-full kind of person. "That's where you're wrong," Abdul said, winking at Jem. They'd been flirting since day one, and we all knew they'd probably end up a couple, whether it was on Earth or on Mars. "It's hilarious." When the tiny bioengineered bots had barely filled a petri dish and were sprouting adorable models of habitation, sanitation, and manufacturing facilities, it was kind of funny. When we'd been on Mars for 2 months, living and working in the full-size versions of their creations, but they kept on replicating, regardless of our programming, it stopped being amusing. It's not as if none of us could have predicted the bots swarming and developing a plan of their own. We all thought about it. Abdul's jokes were just the most obvious way to describe the concern. Everything is a trade-off, and at the time, it seemed like a reasonable risk in return for the things they could do for us. Now, as they make their way up my legs, I think I honestly couldn't have done anything differently to prevent this outcome. But I do wonder if we should have spent more time planning for the worst-case scenario. I wonder if Jem, in their shimmering, living coffin, had thought about that in the end. "Okay, that's just freaky." Marshall visibly shuddered as I let the bots crawl over my hand. They didn't really behave like insects, and they definitely didn't feel like insects. They were silky, almost warm, especially after a long stint in the desert in my suit. Thermoregulation in a suit is never right. "It feels nice," I said, holding my hand out to him. He made a face and disappeared into his hydroponics lab. Marshall was always happier dealing with things that grew, rather than things we built. He said he'd take evolution over engineering any day. I chuckled and watched as a small cluster of bots gathered in my palm for a fraction of a second, then splintered off like a flock of birds dispersing. It was oddly beautiful. We were still in our prefab shelter then, the modular building serving all our needs, albeit barely. I was just about finished with the final programming to let our bots loose, to let them begin building us a permanent home, using the elements already extant on Mars to create a form of protection from those self-same elements. It was an elegant solution to an ugly problem, and I couldn't wait to see what they would devise. I admit that I anthropomorphized them. Not individually, of course. I didn't come up with thousands of names or anything, but I thought of them as alive, like working animals maybe. When I was alone, I talked to them. After a while, I didn't care if I was alone or not. It bothered Cherie. She took me aside one night after we'd all kicked back with a movie and asked if I was okay. "Are you asking me as a friend or as my boss?" The 5 of us were a proper team, hashing out issues collectively, but there had to be someone with whom the buck stopped. A mission lead who, when the shit starts hitting the fan, could make a decision and know that we'd all carry it out, no questions asked. That was Cherie. A shadow crossed her face, as if my question hurt her, or maybe I was just imagining that. Projecting. "Yes," she said eventually. I couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, I'm okay," I said. "It's mostly rubber ducking. Look, I don't really believe they understand me or anything." I laughed. "They're way too small for verbal language processors." She nodded, but I could tell she was still concerned. Rightly so, probably. I'm not talking to them now. I've never been claustrophobic, none of us could be in this job, but I think it's instinctual to be terrified of being smothered, buried alive, and yet... They've got my hands now, and the only thing I can still move is my head. I ought to be screaming, out of my mind in fear. But I've got a deep-down body calm instead. The bots are highly adaptable, able to fabricate all manner of compounds. The part of me that still feels things is inordinately proud that they have figured out how to control our bodies and minds as they do whatever it is they are doing. Breaking us down for constituent elements, I presume. Amazingly, even that thought doesn't repulse me. They have done an excellent job. The first habitation they built was impressive, though more for the proof of concept than for the structure itself. It had 4 walls and a roof, with airlocks and shielding in all the right places, but that was about it. It was functional. "It's a bit boring," Abdul said, walking through the boxy rooms. "It sure beats the prefab, though," Jem said, stretching their arms high above their head and utterly failing to reach the ceiling. I couldn't keep the grin off my face. "It sure as shit beats the prefab," I said, not bothering to conceal the pride in my voice. And that prefab wasn't the designer's first try out of the gate. This is. I ran my hands over the smooth walls, extruded by my bots after their own design. And the next one will be even better. "How do you know?" Cherie asked. "Because that's what they do," I said. "They adapt." The next buildings they fashioned were better, and the ones after that, better still. It was becoming almost comfortable on Mars. Not really, of course. We still needed airlocks and suits, and we were drinking recycled urine, but it was better. It wasn't just the buildings, though. They were better, the bots themselves. Adaptation. It's a survival mechanism in organic life, a result of the drive to continue being. Of course, it never occurred to me that it could work in reverse, that the programmed nature of my bots to adapt would lead to them possessing a drive to survive. I can only assume that's what's happened. I programmed them to do whatever they had to in order to make a habitable environment for us humans, but I guess the purpose got lost, mutated by the very adaptability that made them useful to us in the first place. Maybe it's only fair that we are now becoming useful to them. My sarcophagus encloses me completely now. I can see nothing, feel very little on my skin. Even my breathing and my heart rate seem to be slowing. But there's still no panic, none of that survival instinct left in me. Thinking is slow, like walking through a bog. I ought to be afraid. I ought to have regrets and longing. I ought to think of home or family or lovers. I ought to wish I could see the stars. But my only wish is that I could live to see what my children will become. "Betsy?" The voice comes to me as if from a long distance, and it's familiar and comforting even though I can't identify it. "She's coming around. Give her some space." There's a rustling, and I become aware of light. I can see, though I can't seem to open my eyes. The light becomes stronger and shapes coalesce in my vision, and I realize that what I can't do is close my eyes. I can't blink. The strangest part is that it feels completely normal. I try to take a deep breath, but there's no fullness in my lungs, no weight to the air, only the incongruous taste of seltzer in my mouth. I don't even feel my chest expanding. I guess I'm not breathing anymore either. Am I dead? Yet somehow still aware? That doesn't seem plausible. The shapes around me firm up, and I recognize Cherie. Only I don't recognize her at all. Her long hair is gone. Not cut short, but completely absent. And her skin is covered in a black, scaly coating. "Betsy," she says, her voice the only thing that seems close to my memory of her. "How do you feel?" I think about the question. I remember the bots engulfing me, suffocating me, devouring me. But I haven't been deconstructed from my useful components after all. Quite the opposite. I'm whole. More than whole. I am more. I can see infrared, taste radiation. I've been augmented, improved. I feel great. Something like a smile appears on Cherie's face, and she helps me up. We are still in the main habitation building, where I'd found the others being swarmed by the bots. The airlock opens. No, it's not an airlock anymore. It's a door, an Earth-style single door through which Abdul enters. He's not wearing a suit. He's not wearing anything. Looking down at my own body, I see that the black scales are part of us. A kind of permanent suit, I suppose. Betsy, I'm glad to see you finally decided to join us. The others? I ask, still unsure how to work my new voice. Everyone is awake. We are all fine, Abdul says. Then his obsidian face slips into a grin. Better than fine. Though I have to say, this is going to be awfully hard to explain to NASA. I obviously look confused, so Cherie explains. You did a good job, Betsy. Too good, maybe. You programmed your bots to do whatever it took to make Mars a feasible place for us to live. And they did. They found a most elegant solution. They didn't change Mars to suit us. They changed us to suit Mars.
And that's our story. The gray goo problem has been a staple of science fiction for a long time. We all know about unintended consequences, and we all love to point out the perils of hubris, especially to that extra clever engineer who thinks this one thing will solve all the problems. It's easy to imagine the many ways in which they can go wrong. What's harder is to turn that trope on its head. How could the unintended consequence end up being exactly right? That's what I love about this story. Whether we're talking math, science, or engineering, we're always looking for elegant solutions to our problems. That means we want to avoid the messy and fuzzy process of navigating random or chaotic systems. We like it when 4 little equations explain one of the fundamentals of how the entire universe works. Humanity is drawn to simplicity. The world of AI today, especially deep learning, points to the fallacy of our inclinations. Using some very simple mathematical principles, we build systems of such complexity that we can't predict their behavior. We give the system a goal and we let it come up with an optimal solution, even if that answer makes no sense to us. Darusha's story illustrates how that can go in our favor. Instead of terraforming a planet or destroying the environment with our constructions, a swarm of AIs figures out a direct, albeit unexpected, solution. Change the humans. We are nothing if not resistant to change. But what if that transformation is better for everyone in the long run? Escape Pod is a production of Escape Artists Inc. and is brought to you with a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Don't change it, don't sell it. Do go forth and share it. If you'd like to support Escape Pod, please rate or review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite app. We are 100% listener supported, and we count on your donations to keep the lights on and the servers humming. You can donate via patreon.com by searching for Escape Artists, or via PayPal through our website, escapepod.org. Patreon subscribers now have access to exclusive merchandise and content. Our opening and closing music is by Daikaiju at daikaiju.org. And our closing quotation this week is from Robert Sparrow, professor of philosophy, who said, "Terraforming demonstrates at least 2 serious defects of moral character: an aesthetic insensitivity and the sin of hubris. To change whole planets to suit our ends is arrogant vandalism." Come back next week for an Own Voices story about a planet colonized by non-neurotypical people. Thanks for listening, and enjoy your auditory adventures through time and space.